Anna from Bright Lane Gardens, and today is a deceptively sunny Michigan winter day. It is still freezing outside, but nevertheless, I am going to start my coneflower seeds today. It is early February, and this is a little earlier than I would normally start purple coneflower seeds to plant outside, but because we are a nursery and hoping to sell these guys in early spring, I want to start them as early as I can to make sure that we have at least somewhat of a mature plant to sell to our customers. If you have started other native plants from seeds before, you might be familiar with a cold stratification process. When it comes to purple coneflower or Echinacea purpurea, this cold stratification process is not necessarily required. However, some people have reported higher rates of germination with the cold stratification. Today I'm going to test it out, and I'm going to actually plant half of my seeds without that cold stratification and half with that cold stratification, just to see if we do end up with a higher germination rate with the cold stratification. We're going to go through a few steps today. First and foremost, we are going to talk about that cold stratification, what that means, and how to introduce that to your purple coneflower seeds. Next, I'm going to show you the custom soil mix that I mix up to start my seedlings in, and then we'll talk about caring for them and how long we can expect until we start to see some germination. To get started, you are first going to need, of course, your purple coneflower seeds. These we did purchase, but if you've looked back at previous videos, you'll know that we do collect some of our own seeds as well, depending on what the variety is. Either way, we seem to see the same germination rate as long as the seeds are stored properly. These seeds here are actually from Prairie Moon Nursery, which is one of our favorites when it comes to purchasing native plant seeds. We trust them and highly recommend their product. So we're going to start with this optional cold stratification step. Cold stratification is essentially a defense mechanism for that seed, and typically it occurs in northern regions or colder regions where the climate does represent a harsher winter. Basically, a cold stratification period is a period where the seed requires that dormancy in the cold in order to germinate in the spring. And that is a defense mechanism because it prevents the seed from prematurely sprouting during those winter months, which would inevitably kill off that seed after it sprouts. So having that built-in cold stratification period prevents the seed from sprouting up a little too early. Now, when we're growing our native plants from seeds, even in an indoor environment, we still need to mimic this cold stratification period. You can mimic it by doing winter sowing. That's not what this video is about, but there are so many videos out there on winter sowing. It's a great, easy method, especially if you're just getting started with native plants. For us, we like to force that cold stratification period because we have a strict timing running as a plant nursery. We know exactly when we want our plants to sprout, and therefore we have to mimic that cold stratification period indoors to get those to sprout a little earlier than they typically would outdoors. To do that, we just use the refrigerator. So what I'm going to do with a portion of my purple coneflower seeds today is show you what we do to mimic that cold stratification period. This can be used on other varieties as well, as long as you know how long that cold stratification period is. Now, since purple coneflower doesn't have a requirement for that stratification period, I'm going to choose probably 10 to 20 days. Typically, we see a cold stratification period of 30 to 90 days when it comes to native plants, but I think we can get away with a shorter time frame on these ones just because it's not technically required to get them to sprout in the first place. So I have my purple coneflower seeds here. This is 2 full ounces of purple coneflower seeds, just for reference. It's really lightweight. The seeds aren't tiny, but they're certainly not large by any means, so you'll want to be careful and just open a tiny corner of your packet. Now, this is what purple coneflower seeds look like. These are actually held in that spiky center part of the flower. So if you do collect your own seeds, this is what they'll look like once they have their hulls off. They're really lightweight, they can blow away pretty easily, and you'll want to keep them stored just like you would store any other seed in a dry and dark environment. So I've got a handful of these seeds. If I had to estimate just how many, I would say anywhere from 50 to 65 seeds are in my hand here. I have a coffee filter. It's a little brown, we just don't buy the bleached coffee filters. I'm going to go ahead and dump these seeds right into this coffee filter. If you don't have coffee filters at home, you can also use a paper towel. I like the fact that the coffee filters tend to not have lint on them, so nothing will get stuck to my seed. From there, I'm going to thoroughly soak both the coffee filter and the seeds. Once the entire coffee filter is wet, I'm going to go ahead and fold it in half. And then I'm actually gonna fold the edges in too, just so I don't lose any of my seeds out of those edges, and you end up with kind of a little coffee filter taco. From here, I'm actually going to wrap it in a dry paper towel. Some of the moisture will of course seep into that paper towel, but this just helps keep a more consistent moisture inside of my Ziploc baggie. I'm gonna give it one more spritz just to be safe. You want the entire packet to be thoroughly wet without any dripping water. Once that's all set, you're gonna go ahead and place that inside of your Ziploc bag, and you will seal it all the way. Make sure that you label the outside of your bag, especially if you're doing cold stratification on several seed varieties at once. Also include the date that you first put it in the fridge. You'll be surprised at how quickly you can forget just how much time has elapsed. Like I said, I'm gonna shoot for 10 to 20 days with this guy here. So I'm gonna go ahead and stick him in my fridge. I will open this baggie up and do a check about once a week or once every 5 to 7 days, just to make sure we don't have any mold growth in there and to make sure we don't have anything germinating yet. If you do open your bag and notice that you have some seeds germinating, go ahead and plant them immediately, even if you haven't hit the time frame that you think is correct for your seeds. If you let them sit in the fridge, it could kill off that germinated seed. So once you start to see anything germinate in there, go ahead and start to put them in the soil. Whether you choose to do the cold stratification method or plant directly in the soil, this next step will be mandatory either way. I'm gonna go ahead and mix up my custom soil blend. Now, this basic recipe that I'm going to show you today is what I typically use for all of my native plant seeds, unless they have special requirements like they're a marsh plant and require a different soil type. For the majority of my meadow flower seeds that I plant, this is going to do great. Now keep in mind that your Echinacea coneflowers are going to be drought tolerant. So keeping that in mind, you really want a well-draining soil, and most of my other wildflowers do as well. I like to use a 75% mix of peat moss and sand, or any variation of Coco coir, anything like that, that can be really lightweight and well draining, while the other 25% I can use my organic material and garden soil in. For today, for my drier ingredients, which is going to make up 75% of my mix, I do have my play sand here. This is really inexpensive and you can get it at any of the big box depot stores. And then I love to use our Espoma Organics Peat Moss. If you've been following our channel, you know that we absolutely love this brand for many reasons, but specifically for my native plant garden, I love to use Espoma Organics products, including their peat moss, soil, and fertilizer. I will link this in the description down below, but this is just their general organic peat moss. And lastly, I will top it off with 25% of this organic garden soil. It's really helpful to have a big container like this that you can mix all of your ingredients in. If you're working outside and have a nice outdoor space, a wheelbarrow is absolutely perfect. For today's purposes, since I'm indoors, I'm just going to use this plastic tote here. I can throw the cover on in between my plantings and it'll be fresh and ready for me for my next batch of seedlings. Once you have everything added, you can go ahead and give it a really good mix. You want a completely blended mix before you start adding it to any of your trays. You should be left with a really nice mix that's lightweight to the touch. You can see that sand mixed in there evenly. Make sure you work through any larger chunks or any big debris. Keep in mind that your goal is to have that tiny seed send down delicate roots into this mix, so you really want to have it as fine and fluffy as possible. The trays that you use for your seedlings actually make a pretty big difference. You want to make sure that your planting cells are large enough to accommodate your plant up until the time that you transplant it, and you want to make sure that drainage will be encouraged during the seedling phase. I really love these trays. I will link them in the description below. These each have 6 cell removable compartments in them. It makes it super easy to work with different groups of plants, especially in a nursery setting. Each of the individual cells does have a drainage hole on the bottom of it. However, the tray itself is completely solid on the bottom, meaning that water won't leak out all over the shelves that I keep my seedlings on. Additionally, using a tray like this that's completely solid on the bottom will ensure that it will hold on to some of that excess water. And if you let your seedlings start to dry out as they mature, a lot of times it'll cause those roots to really drive down, sending a taproot down to search for that water. So it actually benefits you and helps have a stronger root structure for your younger seedlings when you're working with native plants. These trays also come with a built-in humidity dome. I really like the humidity domes, but when you use them, you have to make sure that you can go down there and check your plants once or twice a day to prevent any mold or mildew growth. Sometimes trapping in the humidity can cause that, but also trapping in some of that moisture into the soil will help encourage your seedling to sprout faster. Taking each of my 6 cell trays, I'm going to go ahead and fill up each cube just about to the top of the cube. I usually like to leave a very small gap, like less than 1/4 of an inch, just to make sure that when I do water these plants, the water doesn't automatically flow off the tray. Should look something like that when you're done. Once your tray is full, we're ready to plant. I have my filled tray here, and I did go back through and try to level out any cells that looked like they were a little higher or a little lower than the others. This is just to make sure everybody can get the same amount of light, the same amount of water, for equal chances of germination. None of these cells are packed down. I usually just throw the mix in and I'll tap on the side of the container to let it settle, but I never want to pack that soil down because, again, we want to make sure that these fragile new roots can find their way down to the bottom of each cell. I am going to make a tiny, and I mean very tiny, indentation in the top of the soil. Typical rule of thumb with any native plant seed is you never want to plant deeper than the width of the seed. So we're talking about 3 millimeters or less with these coneflower seeds. Now, a lot of times when we are planting outside, we'll want to cover the very top of the seed, usually just to deter the birds. Otherwise, the seeds will germinate just fine without that soil cover. So when you're in an indoor setting and you don't run the risk of a bird or different type of animal scooping up that seed, we really hardly have to cover the top of it at all. Primarily, the only reason for planting the seed any depth is to ensure that the entire seed can benefit from the moisture of the soil around it. Using a small tool, I just have this weird little shovel thing. You can use the tip of a pencil or anything else similar. Make a tiny indentation no deeper than 1/8 of an inch into the top of each cell. From there, go ahead and dump out a pile of seeds in your hand, and I'm going to shoot to put about 2 to 3 seeds in each of these cells, keeping in mind that these tend to have a 60 to 75% germination rate, even if you do everything right. So you want to plan for some failure in advance. Once you have seeds in all of your cells, just using the pads of your finger, gently wipe the very top of the soil to create a gentle covering over those seeds. It's okay if some of those seeds are still on the surface of the soil. Like I said before, soil is not absolutely necessary to germinate those seeds. We'll leave them right on top, and it'll be interesting to see if those sprout up before the ones under the surface of the soil do. Once you have all of your seeds planted, you want to go ahead and thoroughly soak the top layer of soil on your tray. Don't forget to add your labels. If you're like me and you love to think you're going to remember what this is in a couple months, trust me, you won't. And with native plants, a lot of them look very similar in their early stages of growth. So do yourself a favor now, label it with the scientific and the common name, and I love to add the date just to see how big it gets after a certain number of days, because that helps me plan better for next year. I am going to use my humidity dome on these just to help keep that moisture in during the germination period. I also like to use a seedling mat once I start to see these guys sprout up, and that's just a gentle heated mat that you can set underneath of your tray to provide a little additional heat for your seedlings. Coneflower seeds will typically take anywhere from 10 to 21 days to germinate, with a huge variation even coming from that same batch. So I'll check in the next 10 days and just see if we have any early sprouters. From there, we'll check in periodically throughout the next 10 days after that to see how many more will sprout up. In that amount of time, the batch that I sent away for cold stratification should be ready to be planted in their trays next, so we'll include an update on that as well. For right now, this is all we've got on our coneflower seed starting. I hope this video was informational and useful for you, and I hope it encourages you to give it a try to start native plants from seed. It's a hugely fulfilling experience, and you can really fill out your yard for minimal cost when you start your native plants in this manner. We'll plan to check back in 10 to 20 days to give you an update on how our seeds are germinating. In the meantime, if any questions come to mind, don't hesitate to leave them in the comment section below. As always, thank you so much for your time today. I sure do appreciate you tuning into our channel, and I hope to catch you next time. Bye-bye.